At Heathrow International Airport, where every footstep is traced by hundreds of cameras and a single glance could trigger a security alert, Elena Ward was one of the few who could observe without making anyone feel watched. She didn't speak much. She never rushed. With calm eyes and a tall, slender figure in a Navy Customs uniform, Elena had a quiet habit of reading people, not through what they said, but through how they carried their shoulders, where their fingers rested on the strap of a bag, or the rhythm of their breath while waiting in line. She was 38, lived alone in West London, in a top-floor flat filled with books and dim, never-too-bright lights. Once, she'd been in a long relationship with a war correspondent, the man who had taught her how to listen for things left unsaid. But he never returned from an assignment in southern Lebanon. Since then, Elena had learned how to leave everything personal at the checkpoint door, as if her soul, too, had been zipped into a suitcase and slid beneath the X-ray scanner. At the unit, they called her the gatekeeper who never smiled. Not because she was cold, but because she moved as if hearing a melody too soft for others to catch. A younger officer once joked, "If this airport were a piece of music, Elena would be the low note keeping it all together." In 12 years at Heathrow's border force, she'd never been complained about, never made a single mistake. She avoided social media, never touched hard liquor, and didn't go out after 10 p.m., unless she had the night shift. The only one who ever made her break those quiet little rules was a dog she didn't choose. But who chose her? On the day everything began, Elena walked into her final shift of the week with the same composure she always carried. But something was different. There was a strange stillness in the air, something that clung to the long, fluorescent-lit hallways like breath held just a second too long. As if the whole airport was waiting for something it didn't yet know how to name. Coda was not the kind of dog you'd call baby or sweetheart. He didn't wag his tail when touched, nor bounce with joy when seeing someone familiar. He stood, still straight, watching, like a living antenna, tuned not to sound, but to feelings, always scanning for a ripple in the illusion of normal. Like Elena, Coda disliked being touched without reason. And like her, he carried a past no one could fully unravel. Some said Coda had been trained at a military facility near the Welsh border, the kind where only the most instinct-driven dogs were kept after 3 brutal rounds of elimination. Among dozens of Malinois that went through the selection, Coda was the only one who never flinched at a shouted command, never stole food, and never disobeyed, not even once. And that, they whispered, was exactly what made him unsettling. No one quite remembered who signed off on transferring Coda to civilian customs, but rumor had it, "That dog's too quiet, not fit for war zones, but he'll hear what no scanner or radar ever will." And he did. In 3 years at Heathrow beside Elena, Coda had exposed 14 illegal entry attempts, 3 chemical drug smuggling operations disguised as cosmetics, and once even found a rare turtle egg hidden in a baby formula container. Every single time, he barked only once. Never frantic, never loud, just right on time. Elena had always believed there was something in Coda's eyes that made people instinctively look away. It wasn't aggression. It was depth, as if he knew more than any dog should. One rookie officer had once said, half joking, "That dog's like a retired soldier in a 4-legged body. He doesn't need orders. He just needs to be understood." In the unit's operational logbook, Coda was the only dog who had never disobeyed a command, never caused confusion, never breached protocol. And maybe that was why, on that night, when he suddenly lunged forward, barking loud and refusing the command to stand down, Elena knew. It wasn't a lapse of control. It was something real, something wrong. Heathrow at night had its own rhythm, slower but no less tense. When the shutters of the duty-free stores rolled down and the staccato clicks of high heels began to fade across the polished tiles. Those left in the immigration zone understood. They were standing on the edge of the day's final breath. Overhead, a digital display blinked in quiet blue. Flight KE-907, inbound from Seoul, landed. 23:27, 42 minutes behind schedule. Elena looked up at the board by instinct. Nothing unusual for Asian flights, weather, air traffic, or just the domino effect of delays across distant terminals. But still, there was something. A silence that stretched too tight. Night shifts were always short-staffed, but tonight, Terminal 3's international arrivals area was nearly hollow. The two luggage scanners sat idle, humming gently with the breeze from a vent. The officer at Desk 6 had one headphone in, tapping lazily on his touchscreen with a single hand. A cup of tea sat beside a stack of forms, steam rising in no hurry. Coda walked at Elena's side, step for step, a shadow in sync. No barking, no haste, just gliding through the scent trails left behind on the stone floor, sweat, cologne, leftover snacks brushed off on a sleeve. He could smell the things eyes would miss, and the secrets people tucked behind polite smiles. Then, the glass doors slid open. The first wave of passengers from Flight KE-907 began to trickle into the processing area. An elderly Korean man dragged a heavy suitcase, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. A young woman in a fur-lined coat lingered behind the group, half watching her phone, half scanning the space around her with instinctive caution. A university student moved slowly, holding a box of pastries and a folder of documents. All of it seemed ordinary. But Elena knew better. It was within the ordinary that danger liked to hide. Smugglers never acted like smugglers, and people in desperation always tried hardest to seem more normal than anyone else. Coda paused for a fraction of a second, his head tilting, just slightly, as if he had picked up something that language couldn't name. Elena didn't notice. She was still reviewing the flagged passport list, the travelers requiring heightened attention based on intelligence from international partners. None of them matched the name Ariel Song. None of them. But tonight, that name would rewrite the entire playbook. The final shift of the night always carried a different cadence. No more swarms of tour groups. No frantic voices calling out for lost companions. No crowding at the baggage scanners. Everything softened into a quiet that felt suspiciously light. Elena stood beside Checkpoint 4, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of her belt radio. The terminal was filled with scattered footsteps, the scraping roll of luggage wheels, a child's quiet whimper somewhere at the back of the line. Nothing stood out, and that, more than anything, pulled her attention tighter. Peace didn't always mean safety. That was something Elena had learned in her earliest years at Heathrow, where everything ran smoothly, until it didn't. Coda lay down beside her feet. His posture looked relaxed, but his eyes stayed open. His ears flicked toward every minor shift in sound. The soft snap of fingernails against a luggage cart, the strained breathing held too long or something more subtle. A sound that had never once appeared across thousands of screenings before. A British man in a sharp blue suit passed by and smiled at her. Elena returned a polite nod, her gaze fixed on his hands. An older Vietnamese woman shuffled forward with a luggage trolley, her face kind, but her eyes flickering with something heavier, as if what she carried wasn't just gifts for grandchildren, but a decision not yet resolved. A short, uneven cry rang out from the end of the line, a child's voice, not loud, not persistent, but offbeat. Elena lifted her head. Coda was already on his feet, head turned, alert. Nothing was visibly wrong. No one panicked, yet from that strange quiet, something unseen stirred beneath the surface. She stepped out from behind the counter, heading toward the baggage scanner near the manual screening bay. Coda followed. No hand signal. None needed. They had done this together hundreds of times, in hundreds of different circumstances. And one thing was always constant: absolute trust. The air inside the terminal seemed to shift colder, or perhaps it was only the sensation that slipped through clothes and minds alike, settling inside those who remained awake at this hour. A kind of cold that didn't come from temperature, but from premonition. Outside, the drizzle over London tapped steadily against the glass dome ceiling. And in that moment, Elena had no way of knowing that within minutes, everything she had ever trusted about protocol was about to come undone. And the first crack in that order would come from a single bark. She arrived like any other passenger, neither late nor rushed, and careful not to draw attention. Her black hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck. A thick ash-gray coat draped over a pale cotton dress, and simple sneakers carried her quietly across the polished floor. Her left hand pushed a navy blue stroller. Her right arm clutched a large over-the-shoulder bag, slung tight and heavy, more so than it should have been. Ariel Song. Her name didn't appear on any watch list. South Korean passport. Boarding pass, valid. Declared reason for entry. Visiting family, researching immigration options. Everything was smooth. So smooth, it felt rehearsed. But Coda didn't read files. He read something else. The moment the woman stepped into the screening lane, Coda stopped in his tracks. It wasn't her scent. It was the way she moved. Elena was still inspecting the documents of the passenger in front of her, but the subtle pull on the leash made her glance sideways. Ariel's grip on the stroller handle was too tight. Her fingers had turned pale from squeezing. Her head was tilted down, but her eyes flicked left to right, too quickly, too mechanically. She wasn't observing. She was calculating, looking for exits, not directions. And most telling of all, she avoided every pair of eyes in the room, especially the uniforms. Coda stepped half a pace forward, ears rigid, nose sampling the air in tiny, focused bursts. Elena instinctively tightened the leash, but he didn't step back. He stood frozen, eyes locked on the young woman as she slowly pushed the stroller closer. The child inside stirred softly, let out a short cry, then fell quiet again. Ariel leaned down to soothe the baby, but the motion lacked warmth. It was practiced, performed, like a gesture learned from watching someone else. Elena quietly unclipped the small notepad from her belt and made a note. Subject: female, East Asian descent, anxious behavior, avoiding eye contact, white-knuckling stroller. Still, Coda hadn't barked, but Elena felt it. He was holding a breath, like a drawn bowstring, waiting. It all unfolded in under 3 seconds. Ariel was just steps from the checkpoint now. Elena was preparing to greet the baby, as she often did with families, an instinctual act of kindness. But Coda didn't wait. No command was given, no tug of the leash, only a faint growl, low, sharp, barely audible, before Coda launched forward. The first sound was a single bark, sharp and clean, like a blade slicing the air. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. It was a declaration. Danger. Then he lunged. The entire arrival hall seemed to freeze. Elena's head whipped toward him, startled. Her hand flew to pull the leash back, but it was too late. Coda had already passed the reach. The leash slipped from her grasp, uncoiling like it had been calculated. The Malinois surged past 3 passengers, sprang onto the edge of the stroller, both front paws landing squarely on the safety bar, and thrust his head toward the thick navy blanket covering the child inside. Ariel screamed. It wasn't the kind of scream that came from being startled by a dog. It was something deeper, more primal. A broken cry torn from the pit of her chest, laced with a fear that had been buried for too long. Elena couldn't make out the exact words, but she felt the shift instantly, a chill spreading down her spine like ice water. The woman wasn't reacting like someone under attack. She was reacting as if something terrible had just been confirmed. A passenger behind them stumbled backward, dropping a suitcase that hit the floor with a loud thud. A child started crying, louder and more frantically now. A man tossed his backpack aside and dropped to his knees. In moments, the terminal was spiraling into chaos. The alarm system kicked in with a sharp whine, sweeping through the checkpoint like a storm. But inside Elena's head, only one thought rang out with painful clarity. Coda had just broken protocol. For 3 years, he had never done this, never lost control, never left his position, never deviated, not even by half a step. And the first time it happened, it was with a woman and a baby. Elena rushed forward. She didn't look at the crowd or respond to the voices buzzing in her earpiece. She ignored the shouts coming through the radio, the orders, the sudden escalation. Her focus narrowed to a single point as she reached out and grabbed Coda's collar, pulling hard. "Coda, back!" she commanded. But Coda didn't move. He didn't growl. He didn't resist. He stood there, body trembling like a drawn bowstring, his eyes fixed on the stroller. It wasn't defiance. It was something closer to a plea. He was waiting for someone to see what he already had. Then the second bark came. This one was louder, longer, and fractured like an emergency siren. He was no longer warning softly. He was declaring it, openly and without hesitation. The bark cut through the terminal, and instantly, things fell apart. In the distance, a man tried to push through the barrier, waving his suitcase over his head and shouting. 2 parents rushed to pull their child back, both repeating the same question in rising panic. "Is it a bomb? Is it a bomb?" The internal security alarm changed tone. 2 short beeps followed by 1 long, signaling a level 2 threat. A coordinator sprinted across the floor, shouting into her radio, calling for immediate camera focus on Sector D and confirming Code Red status. Elena held the leash tighter, trying again to pull Coda back, but he wouldn't yield. This wasn't standard protective behavior. This was something else. Coda was going against orders, something he had never done before. And with a K9 like him, that meant everything. On the other side of the stroller, Ariel's song remained completely still. But it wasn't the stillness of confusion or fear. It was the stillness of someone holding her breath to keep a nightmare from breaking loose. She didn't look at Elena. She didn't look at the crowd. Her gaze was locked on Coda's eyes. There was something there, not fear of the dog, not fear of being caught. It was fear of being seen, of having the truth dragged into the open. "What's going on?" The voice of Supervisor Daniels cut through the tension. He approached quickly, 2 conflict response officers at his side. His eyes flicked across the scene, analyzing every detail in a heartbeat. Coda reacted strongly. "No prior indication," Elena answered calmly, though her pulse was racing. Her hand remained firm on the dog's collar. "Female passenger, stroller, high anxiety behavior. Coda is locked on the infant. He's refusing to stand down. Reaction level? Level 3. Barking. Physical proximity breach. No attack posture." Daniels turned his attention to Coda. The dog was still as stone. He hadn't moved, hadn't panted, hadn't broken his stance. It was the posture of a predator, but not out of instinct. It was out of duty. "Ward," Daniels said, his voice lower now. "You know the regulations." Elena nodded. She knew them well. Any disobedience from a K9 officer had to be documented and reviewed, and depending on the outcome, could lead to suspension. But as her eyes remained fixed on the dog beside her, one truth rose above the rest. In 3 years, Coda had never been wrong. Not once. Now it was Elena, the one who knew Coda better than anyone, who faced the decision. To follow the procedure as written, or to trust the gaze of a creature who had never once lied to her. Not in all the years they had worked side by side. She could feel her heart pounding against her ribs, each beat louder than the last. She inhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. Coda had stopped barking, but his body remained taut, every muscle drawn tight. His eyes were still locked on the stroller just a few feet away. Ariel Song didn't move. She clutched the strap of her oversized bag like it was the only thing anchoring her. Her mouth was pressed into a firm, pale line. Inside the stroller, the baby boy, no more than 8 months old, shifted gently in his sleep, occasionally stirring beneath a pale blue blanket that looked too thin for the coldness gathering in the air. Daniels's voice came quietly but clearly. "Elena, check it." The moment stretched. Every movement felt heavy, suspended, as if time had slowed around them. Elena stepped forward. She put on her gloves and leaned over the stroller. It was a basic model, older, with some wear along the wheels. Her eyes briefly rested on the boy's face. He had long eyelashes that fluttered with each breath. His mouth was slightly open. She caught the faint, sour scent of milk clinging to his collar. He was so small, too small to be anywhere near this kind of moment. Elena lowered her hand and began to peel back the cover. The first layer was just the blanket, folded with care. Then she touched the mattress. It wasn't thick, but it was unexpectedly heavy. Under the fluorescent lights, a slight bump revealed itself, something just beneath the surface. Her heartbeat faltered. She slid her hand beneath the padding. Even through the glove, the cold of metal seeped through. It was solid, hard, unmistakable. She didn't need to guess, she already knew. Elena glanced at Daniels. He gave a single nod, his face unreadable. With her free hand, she reached for her utility knife and carefully made a small cut along the edge of the mattress, just enough to reveal what was hidden inside. It was a Beretta M9. The handgun lay directly beneath the child's back. No wrapping, no safety case. The safety was still on, but the magazine had been loaded. It was real, and it was ready. For a moment, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the hallway. Elena took a step back. Her voice was low but steady as she reported, "It's real. Beretta, chambered, and loaded." Daniels acted immediately. He raised one hand to signal. Within seconds, the 2 security officers closed the gap around Ariel. She didn't resist. She didn't run. She simply collapsed into herself, her shoulders falling like a leaf losing its hold. Her voice came out as a whisper, so soft it almost vanished. "Please don't scare him. Please!" A medical responder rushed in. Despite the trembling in her hands, Elena crouched again and carefully checked the baby. His breathing was stable. No injuries. But his skin felt cooler than it should have, probably from lying against cold steel for too long. Then, at last, Coda sat down. There was no more tension in him, no more urgency, no aggression. He simply looked at Ariel, not with anger, not with judgment, but with something quieter, something deeper. It was as if he were saying, "I understand why you did it, but I had to protect the child." The corridor leading to the isolation room at Heathrow wasn't long, but to Ariel Song, it felt like a nightmare without end. 2 security officers walked beside her, silent, their footsteps echoing evenly against the white tile floor. There were creases still visible on her blouse from where someone had grabbed her. The strap of her bag had been removed, and her hair was tied loosely to one side. She looked like someone on the run, even though she had never left the security perimeter. Elena followed behind with Coda. The Malinois kept his gaze fixed on Ariel, not with aggression, but with a quiet, steady focus, almost like understanding. Elena wasn't sure what to believe. The gun they had found was real, loaded, and placed beneath an infant. That alone was enough to warrant a criminal charge under international airport security law. The isolation room was small. A single steel table sat in the center, flanked by 2 metal chairs and a high-mounted camera watching from the corner. Ariel sat down, folding her arms tightly around herself as if trying to keep from falling apart. She hadn't yet been allowed to see her child. The baby had been taken to a medical examination room for emergency evaluation. Even the first question Elena asked, simple, routine, broke the silence like a crack, and Ariel began to cry. "Full name?" "Ariel Song," she answered, her voice dry and hoarse. "I'm his mother. I'm not a criminal." Elena didn't respond immediately. Instead, she laid out the documents recovered so far: a South Korean passport, a birth certificate for the baby, and a temporary residence card under the name Damien Cross. Ariel flinched the moment she saw the name, as if just reading it could cause the ceiling to come crashing down. "I didn't carry the gun to hurt anyone," she whispered. "I carried it because he once threatened me with it. I took it when I fled. It was the only way I knew to keep myself safe." Elena's eyes stayed sharp. She had heard plenty of explanations in her years, excuses from drug traffickers, smugglers, and people carrying unauthorized documents. But never before had someone hidden a loaded weapon beneath their child, then cried while speaking of self-defense. "Who is he?" Elena asked quietly. Ariel raised her head, her voice slow and deliberate. "He's the father of my child." The room fell into a heavy silence. Elena didn't press further, but in Coda's eyes, something instinctual seemed to rise, as if something in him had already spoken quietly, clearly, not a threat, not a criminal. She's afraid. Not of guilt, but of something darker. In a separate room, designed specifically for suspicious baggage screening, the fluorescent lights cast a cold white sheen over everything. Elena stood in front of Ariel's medium-sized suitcase, gloves on, focus sharp, as if reading a story that had words but no voice. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary. A few sets of baby clothes, a packet of wipes, bottles of vitamins, formula, and Korean-labeled wet tissues. No drugs, no foreign objects, no overt signs of smuggling. But the neatness of it all felt suspicious. Too neat. She picked up a small blue shirt. It smelled faintly of old milk. But what caught Elena's eye wasn't the stain. It was the torn neckline that had been poorly stitched back together. She set it aside carefully. Next, she opened a laptop packed in soft fabric. It was new, but oddly, there was no charger. She made a note. A laptop with no charging cable was unusual for someone who used it regularly. Ariel's passport was standard, issued in Seoul, with 3 entries into Europe. Strangely, the most recent entry was just 5 days ago, even though Ariel had said today's flight was her first. Elena frowned. In the system, she found an online declaration under the name Ariel Lee. Same birth date, similar photo, but a completely different address. She reviewed the customs form Ariel had filled at the counter. The purpose of visit was marked as family tourism, but no names were listed, no contact number provided. For the question about carrying potentially dangerous items, Ariel had checked no, a small inconsistency. But in Elena's line of work, even a small inconsistency could turn into a knife pointed inward. She turned to the handheld inspection board and examined the luggage more closely. At the base of the suitcase, a pocket had been sewn shut. Elena cut the stitching. Inside were 2 birth certificates, one for Benjamin Cross, one for Benjamin Song. Both listed the same date of birth, but the signatures in the mother's section were completely different. Elena sighed. Not out of frustration, but from the sense that she was stepping into a labyrinth, one where Ariel didn't seem to be hiding a crime, but rather hiding herself. On the other side of the frosted glass, Coda sat motionless like a statue. His deep brown eyes stayed fixed on the door of the isolation room, where Ariel was still curled in on herself, as if afraid the world beyond those walls might shatter at any moment. Elena scribbled a quiet note in her notebook. Records don't match. But maybe it's not deception. Maybe it's fear. She stepped out of the baggage inspection room, still holding the scattered papers like puzzle pieces that hadn't yet found their frame. She didn't go to the isolation room right away. Instead, she paused in the hallway beside Coda, who remained perfectly still, as if no shift in the world could pull him from his focus. "Coda," she said softly. He didn't turn. Only his tail twitched slightly, but his eyes remained locked on the frosted window at the end of the corridor, where the woman named Ariel Song sat alone, her head leaning against her shoulder, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Elena had seen Coda do this before, but only in other contexts, with smugglers hiding contraband under their jackets, with people whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. Coda always knew. He never needed proof, only instinct. But this time, his gaze held no tension. It had softened. No barking, no growling. None of the stiff alertness of a detection stance. Just the quiet posture of a being trying to understand why this woman trembled so much, even though no one had laid a hand on her. Why her breathing was uneven, not out of guilt or rage, but out of fear. Elena sat beside him, gently placing her hand on his back. "I don't know either," she whispered. "There's too much that doesn't make sense. But not all of it feels wrong." Coda tilted his head slightly, responding to the sound of her voice. He didn't need her to explain. He was simply holding his position, like an anchor in the current of tangled lives that drifted through the heart of this airport. From the observation room, Supervisor Malik watched them both. He looked at Coda, then at Elena, with the calm recognition of someone who had worked in this job long enough to know that sometimes the most important truth wasn't in the files or the baggage scanners. "If a dog won't look away," he had once said, "it might be because he's seeing something we're not ready to face." Coda blinked slowly. His eyes never left Ariel. It wasn't suspicion. It was a question. If everything she's doing is wrong, then why does the fear in her eyes look so much like the ones we've seen before, in people who just needed to be saved? Elena stepped into the isolation room, holding the now organized file. She didn't sit down right away. Instead, she stood across from Ariel, separated by the cold steel table, just one breath of space between them. Ariel looked up. Her eyes were red, but there were no tears left. Just a kind of exhaustion that had seeped all the way into her bones. "I'm not a bad person," she said, voice small but steady. Elena didn't argue. She didn't agree either. She opened the folder and began flipping through the pages one by one, as if conducting an interrogation through silence. The mismatched details. The documents that seemed valid but lacked depth. The travel logs. The reason for entering the UK. Her relationship to the child. Everything checked out on paper, but none of it felt real. "Why hide the gun under the stroller?" Elena asked. Her voice wasn't sharp. It carried a rough edge of weariness, and something quieter beneath it, like confusion. Ariel didn't answer. Her fingers rested on the table, nails scratching faintly against the frozen surface, like she was trying to claw her way toward an exit she couldn't see. "You know the regulations here, don't you?" Elena went on. "A Beretta, loaded, not declared. That alone is enough to put you on the serious offender list." Ariel looked at her. And for a brief second, Elena saw something that didn't belong to a criminal. It was the look of someone who had run very far, and who knew that stopping might cost them everything. "I know," Ariel whispered, more to herself than to the officer. "I know there's no excuse for what I did, but if you knew who he was, you'd understand." "He?" Elena echoed softly. Ariel fell silent. Not another word. Elena closed the file. She stood up and left the room without saying anything else. The door clicked shut behind her like a long exhale. Coda was still waiting in the hallway. He looked up at her, his eyes full of quiet questions, not about rules or protocol, but about feeling. Elena didn't respond right away. She leaned back against the wall, eyes drifting toward the frosted glass window that looked into the room where Ariel still sat. Not resisting, not fighting, just silent. The kind of silence that made people wonder. If she were truly a criminal, then why were her palms bloodied from gripping the chair so tightly throughout the questioning? There was no clear answer in the documents. Only a vague but growing instinct in Elena's mind, sharp, cold, and difficult to ignore. Was this a criminal, or a woman risking everything just to survive? The interrogation room was small, its fluorescent lights casting a cold glow across the polished steel table. Elena sat across from Ariel but didn't speak right away. She let the silence settle for a moment, the way someone might wait for a lake to still before trying to see the bottom. Ariel kept her head down. Her hands were clenched together, fingers constantly rubbing against each other, as if trying to erase some invisible ink left on her skin. On her left wrist, Elena noticed a faint red mark, barely visible, like the trace of salt after old bindings. It wasn't enough to file a report, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt. "Would you like some water?" Elena asked gently, her voice soft as breath. Ariel shook her head. Her dark hair fell forward, covering most of her face. But Elena could still see her eyes beneath the strands, eyes that belonged to someone cornered. Not panicked, not pleading, just tired in a way that settled deep, like dust on doors that had not been opened for years. Elena had seen that look before, years ago, at the refugee camps along the Polish border. In a young Ukrainian woman clutching her infant tight inside a torn jacket, waiting her turn to be examined for bruises she didn't have words to name. But Ariel was not in a refugee camp. She was in an interrogation room at one of the most secure airports in Europe, detained with a loaded handgun found beneath a baby's stroller. And that made everything harder to reconcile. Elena watched closely. She didn't miss a thing. The way Ariel flinched slightly when the door clicked shut, the subtle twitch in her eyes whenever Coda's shadow moved past the hallway window, the way she avoided even unspoken questions that hung thick in the air. There was fear, yes, but not lies. Elena had handled hundreds of cases. Lies had a scent, a rhythm. They came with a faint tremble rehearsed too many times. Ariel didn't have that. Her fear wasn't performed. It breathed. It pulsed, like someone who had spent nights sleeping with a knife under her pillow. A fear with no name, only reflex. "Are you ready to talk?" Elena asked, finally meeting Ariel's gaze for the first time since the investigation began. Ariel looked up. And this time, her hair didn't hide her face. In that moment, Elena didn't see a suspect. She saw someone waiting for another human being to be patient enough to listen, before every word disappeared into silence. Ariel gently touched the glass of water Elena had placed in front of her, but she didn't drink. Her fingertips moved slowly along the rim, as if trying to trace some buried memory etched in the glass. "Elena," she said at last, her voice hoarse and trembling, like a door creaking open after a long storm. "If I tell you everything, will you believe me?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She met Ariel's gaze, neither confirming nor denying, just leaving the silence there, like a space that said only one thing. Go ahead. Ariel gave a small nod, then took a deep breath. The first breath of a story no one ever wants to tell, but that becomes heavier the longer it's held inside. We met in Cardiff, she began, at a defense technology expo. Damien Cross was a security consultant for a private firm. He used to serve in special forces. Elena jotted a few notes but didn't interrupt. At first, he was kind, gentle. He knew how to make people feel safe. Ariel paused, her lips trembling slightly. Until that so-called safety became a form of captivity. She described the early years, the hourly check-in calls, the cameras installed in the kitchen, the bedroom, even on the car seat. Every action had a reason. I'm worried about you. I just want to make sure you're safe. She used to believe that was love. Then one day, the language changed. It shifted from "you forgot" to "you betrayed me," from "where are you going" to "you think you can run from me?" Ariel lowered her head, her voice sinking like dusk creeping into a window. The first time he hit me, I didn't cry. I just went quiet. It was like my body didn't belong to me anymore. Elena tightened her grip on the pen. I reported him once, Ariel said. He had friends in the system. They came and left. No one asked if I was okay. She closed her eyes. Then I got pregnant, and it got worse. He controlled how I held the baby, how I fed him, how I changed his diapers. He said, if I left, our child would grow up without a mother. Not because I'd be dead, but because he'd make the courts believe I was unstable. And I believed him, because I'd already seen him do it. The room fell still. Elena stopped writing. Outside the frosted glass, Coda lifted his head, as if he too heard the voice of a mother describing how she'd been turned into a shadow of herself. And one night, while he was away on a business trip, Ariel continued, I removed the hard drives from the cameras, took the gun from under the bed, picked up my son, and left. Left the house, left the country, left the life I used to live, to start a new one. Her voice cracked. I don't know if that makes me a criminal, but I know if I hadn't done it, there'd be a little boy who never got the chance to grow up. Elena leaned slightly forward when she heard the name. Damien Cross. It rang through the room like a blade sliding across the table, not loud, but cold and clean. Elena had heard the name before, not in headlines, but in quiet meetings between security units. A man with no record, yet surrounded by connections no one wanted to touch. Someone who lived in clean files but left chaos in his wake. Ariel noticed the change in Elena's eyes, and nodded. That's who he is. Wealthy? Elena asked quietly. Wealthy but discreet, owns shares in a private security firm, ties to defense contractors, ex-SAS. He knows how to disappear if he wants, and he knows how to make people disappear if he needs to. Her voice grew tight. He once said, the law belongs to the ones who can afford to rent it. And I believed him, because I watched him make a domestic violence report disappear in less than 24 hours. Elena leaned back slightly, a chill running along her spine. You said you reported him to the police. Twice, Ariel replied. Her eyes drifted, as if staring into a place that was both distant and cruel. Once in Cardiff, once in Bristol. Both times the result was the same. He was invited in for a coffee, and I was the one referred for a psychological evaluation. The most skilled manipulators are the ones who make their victims doubt themselves, Elena murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Ariel looked at her, eyes quietly grateful that she didn't need to explain further. After I gave birth to Caleb, nothing was about me anymore, she said. He installed a camera in the nursery, controlled the medical records, the vaccination schedule. I couldn't take my son anywhere without being asked why. I had no friends, no social media. He called it protecting the family. Elena exhaled, her hand drifting to the edge of the file folder, searching for a sense of grounding. And that's when you decided to leave. No, Ariel corrected. I decided not to let my child grow up believing that control is love. I didn't want Caleb to learn that his mother was always silent, always apologizing, always bracing just to survive another day. Outside the room, Coda still sat quietly, his ears tilted toward the door, as if he too were listening, hearing every word, every fear being unwrapped in the air. Elena gave a slow nod. The name Damien Cross was no longer just a suspicion. He was the epicenter, the shadow Ariel was running from, not out of weakness, but out of the need to survive, and to give her child a chance to live a different life. Elena didn't write anything else in her notebook. It was time to listen more than question. Ariel sat in silence for a long moment before looking up. Her voice was soft, steady, like someone reciting a nightmare she had lived through too many times to forget. I used to wake up in the middle of the night, from the sound of a door opening without footsteps. Elena nodded gently. He moved like a ghost. I put up wind chimes. I installed my own cameras, changed passwords, and then he made me take it all down, said I was paranoid. Some nights, I believed him. Ariel gave a dry, hollow laugh, the kind of smile that carried no light. One time I said the wrong thing, just one sentence about dinner. He stared at me for 3 minutes without blinking. Never laid a hand on me, but I shook the entire night. Elena recognized the pattern. Not the bruises, not the forensic evidence, but the details, those tiny fragments of memory only someone who had lived in fear could remember with such clarity. Have you ever lost track of time in your own home? Elena asked gently. Ariel nodded. I once stood in the kitchen and couldn't remember why I was there, or what I'd been doing 10 minutes before. Elena said nothing. She scribbled a brief note. Dissociation episodes, possible CPTSD. My son, Ariel continued, her hand clenching the edge of her shirt. I've woken Caleb up in the middle of the night, just to make sure he's still breathing. I know I shouldn't. But after the night, Damien took him outside because he cried too long. I haven't been able to sleep deeply since. Outside the window, the light from the arriving flight from Seoul blinked steadily. Coda remained at his post, still unblinking, as if standing guard not just over the airport corridor, but over the memories pouring from the woman seated before Elena. PTSD doesn't always come from war, Elena said, as if to keep Ariel from feeling alone with a diagnosis not yet spoken aloud. It can also come from battles no one sees, where the battlefield is your home and the enemy sleeps beside you. Ariel let out a long, quiet breath, as if something invisible had just unclenched inside her. At the end of the interview, Elena made no formal statement, no conclusions. But in the final glance she gave Ariel, something had shifted. She no longer saw a suspect. She saw a mother, a survivor, someone still learning how to breathe again, after years of holding herself together just to make it through the day. Ariel sat at the edge of the chair, her hands resting lightly on her knees. Her posture was steady, deliberate, an effort to appear calm. But her eyes told a different story. Fear still pulsed through every breath she took. Elena sat across from her and placed a glass of water between them. She didn't rush with questions, didn't accuse. She simply allowed the silence to linger, long enough for the defenses to slowly unravel. Ariel spoke first. Her voice was hoarse, worn thin like something that had been swallowed too many times before. I'm not a criminal. Elena gave a small nod. I'm trying to understand. That gun, Ariel paused, swallowing hard. It wasn't to kill anyone. It was so that if he found me, I'd have a few seconds to run. Not to shoot? Elena asked gently. No, Ariel shook her head, firm and clear. I never even took it out of the holster. I don't know how to use it. I'm terrified of the sound it makes when you rack the slide. She gave a short, brittle laugh, a sound that broke apart in her throat. I almost threw it away. I stood at the living room window with it in my hand. But then I thought, if I die, maybe someone will find it and know I tried, that I was trying to protect my child. Elena studied the woman in front of her. There was no panic now, only exhaustion. Where did you get it? She asked, her voice soft. From his locker. Damien has about 10 guns. He keeps them in different places around the house, but I only took the smallest one, the one he carried most often. I thought, if he noticed it missing, at least he'd come looking. He wouldn't tear apart wherever I was hiding. Not right away. Ariel lowered her head, eyes wet with tears she hadn't yet let fall. There was only one place he never touched, the stroller. He always said taking care of the baby was a woman's job. He never changed a diaper, never held Caleb for more than 10 minutes. Elena tightened her grip around the notebook in her hand. What Ariel said didn't come from any official criminal psychology training, but it was some of the most truthful testimony she had ever heard. That's why I put the gun there, Ariel whispered. If he came, and I couldn't run, at least I could distract him, or scream, or do something, anything, so Caleb could live. Elena still didn't speak, but her expression had shifted. She no longer wore the face of an officer enforcing a rule book. Now she was simply a woman, listening to another woman describe a fear that had no name. Ariel straightened just slightly, as if speaking the truth gave her a fragile kind of momentum, something to push back against the years of weight she had carried alone. The stroller was the only place I knew. He'd never touch, she said, her hands twisting in her lap, fingernails pressing into her palms until her skin turned white. Even when he was furious, Damien never once bent over that stroller. Elena tilted her head, slowly noting the detail. But she didn't need to write it down. She would not forget it. Ever. Ariel continued, her voice strangely steady. When Caleb was 3 months old, I left him in the living room while I cooked. Damien came home, heard him crying. Instead of picking him up, he kicked the base of the stroller and said, "Don't let that thing ruin a man's space again." A silence fell between them, heavy and raw. Elena looked up. "You're sure he never checked?" "I'm sure," Ariel replied without hesitation. "He saw the stroller as mine, like my makeup drawer or the diaper bag, things that didn't belong in his world." Elena inhaled slowly. It was a strange psychological mechanism, but it made a frightening amount of sense. Damien's rigid idea of gender roles had, unknowingly, created the one place where Ariel felt her secret could be safe. "But if you knew how dangerous it was," Elena asked gently, "why would you put your child on top of the gun?" Ariel looked up. "Because I had to get through the airport, through security. If I put it in my bag, they'd find it. If I left it at home, Damien would find it. But in the stroller, beneath Caleb, that was the only place I knew no one, absolutely no one, would think to look." She paused, as if waiting for a reaction. But Elena said nothing. Because she understood that if a mother had reached the point of hiding a weapon beneath her own child, she wasn't making choices between right and wrong. She was standing at the edge of a cliff, where every decision was already wrong. Just some offered a higher chance of survival than others. Ariel's voice grew raspier. "I'm not asking to be forgiven for that. I just want you to understand. I didn't choose the stroller because I saw Caleb as a shield. I chose it because it was the only place I knew. Damien wouldn't touch, wouldn't search, wouldn't suspect." She hesitated, then whispered, "It was like my last safe place." Elena glanced down at Coda, who lay quietly beneath the table, his eyes still fixed on Ariel. The Malinois didn't growl, didn't shift. He simply existed, like a being who understood that in this room, survival was not a matter of logic, but instinct. Ariel didn't speak for a long time after that. The small interrogation room seemed to shrink around them. The only sounds were the soft scrape of Elena's pen across paper and the quiet, steady breathing of Coda. Still loyal, still listening. Then Ariel spoke again. Slowly, evenly, as if reciting a memory buried so deeply it no longer felt like her own. The last time Damien used a gun was when I asked about withdrawing money from our joint account. Elena looked up. Ariel's eyes weren't tearful. They were distant, dulled, as if she had learned to tell her story from somewhere outside her body. He didn't hit me, didn't yell. He just walked into his office, opened a drawer, took out the Glock, placed it on the kitchen counter, then looked at me. Ariel shuddered slightly. She didn't need to finish. Elena could already picture that look, cold, controlling, utterly devoid of reason. "If you ever think about doing anything behind my back again, I swear I won't miss," she quoted. That's what he said. I couldn't breathe. Caleb was in the stroller, less than 2 meters away. Elena gripped her notebook, feeling the muscles in her shoulders tighten. I didn't cry, didn't beg. I just stepped back, nodded, and he smiled. Put the gun away, like nothing had happened. He even kissed Caleb on the forehead before leaving for work. Ariel turned her face away. Beneath the curtain of her long hair, Elena noticed a faint, fading bruise, almost gone, but still leaving the skin an odd, pale shade. That night, I didn't sleep. I packed a bag. I withdrew cash from a hidden account. I called my mother, told her not to call me back. I printed Caleb's birth certificate again, changed the date of birth. I knew what I was doing was illegal. But for the first time, I understood that if I didn't leave, my son would grow up between guns and threats, or worse, he wouldn't grow up at all. Her voice trembled, just slightly. The very next morning, when Damien left the house, I picked up Caleb, grabbed my bag, and walked out, Ariel said. I didn't lock the door. I didn't leave a note. I didn't take anything of value, just my son, and his gun. I took it, not out of revenge, but because I knew if he found me, I needed something. Elena swallowed hard. Beneath the table, Coda leaned slightly toward Ariel. His ears lowered. He didn't bark. He just watched. Some fears don't need to be spoken to be understood. They just need to be witnessed, to be acknowledged as real. Damien never had to yell to control me, Ariel said, her fingers tightening around the chain at her neck. He only had to make me doubt everything I did. Elena stopped writing. There was no hatred in Ariel's eyes, only the fatigue of someone who had grown used to being monitored. Every day, every hour, every breath. There was a camera in Caleb's room, she went on. Not the kind you place in a corner to watch an infant. This one was hidden, inside a stuffed animal right next to the crib. He said it was for safety. Elena's brow furrowed slightly. He had an app to control it remotely, could turn it on or off whenever he wanted. I once tried to put the toy away. The next day it was back. That night he asked me why I didn't want Caleb to be properly monitored and protected. The way Ariel emphasized protected made it sound like a prison. My phone had tracking software. I tried turning off location services, tried uninstalling it. He knew. Always knew. Ariel lifted her head slightly, her voice growing steadier. She wasn't unraveling. She was clarifying. I'm not paranoid. I lived inside a system he built. I didn't have the bank passwords. I wasn't allowed to buy clothes without informing him first. He took photos of receipts every time I went to the store and checked my bag every time I came home. Did you ever try going to the police? Elena asked softly. I did, once, Ariel said. They came, spoke to both of us, then left after Damien offered them coffee and showed his old credentials. One of the officers had worked with him before. She gave a small, bitter smile. Not mocking, just tired. After that, I slipped on the stairs. He said it was an accident. I had to say the same when I got to the hospital. There weren't any other choices left. The room felt thick with weight, like air frozen into silence. Only the faint ticking of a clock broke the stillness, counting down each breath inside a nightmare that hadn't ended yet. Elena looked at Ariel. This woman wasn't a threat, but she also wasn't a fragile victim. She was survival made flesh, holding herself together under invisible surveillance, haunted by voices that didn't need to shout to leave scars. Beneath the table, Coda slowly lifted his head. His gaze had softened now. It no longer carried the tension of alertness, only quiet attention. As if he, too, understood that some people only begin to truly live when they find the courage to escape a cage, no matter how polished, respected, or laced with sweet-sounding lies. The long, empty hallway at night felt like a slow-motion reel of a surveillance video. Everything was still, except for the faint green blink of the security LEDs following their programmed rhythm. Elena was reading through Ariel's written statement on the screen, while Coda lay by the door, his head resting on his front paws, eyes gently narrowed as if drifting. Then, without warning, Coda snapped upright. The way he shifted from calm to full alert was something Elena had come to read with absolute clarity. They had worked through hundreds of patrols together. And she knew, without the need for a sound, that this sudden stillness meant something. Something was wrong. What is it, Coda? She asked, closing the tablet and walking over. But there was no bark, no growl, just tension, tight as a drawn wire. Coda was frozen in place, the slightest tremble visible in his hind legs. His eyes were fixed on a man stepping past the arch of the airport's internal security checkpoint. The man wore a fitted black suit, carried a compact travel case, and had a beanie pulled low over his forehead. A humanitarian-looking badge hung from his neck, something resembling a global NGO or peacekeeping organization. Every step, every gesture was textbook, rehearsed to perfection. But Coda wasn't looking with a human's eyes. He was sensing with a loyal dog's heart. And that heart was screaming in silence. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Who just came through? Elena followed Coda's stare, her hand instinctively resting on the leather holster at her side. The security monitor showed a close-up of the man's face. And for a moment, Elena felt a flicker of something she couldn't ignore, Ariel's voice, echoing in her memory, talking about a man who never showed up without a purpose. Coda began to growl, low, controlled, the first tremor before a coming storm. The automatic doors to the secure area slid closed behind the man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a slate-gray overcoat that clashed oddly with London's mild April weather. His hair was trimmed in a military style. His jawline was firm, his nose straight, and his eyes scanned the surroundings like a laser grid. It wasn't his appearance that made him memorable. It was the deliberate coldness, the practiced blankness. Coda changed posture again, from alert to ready. His whole body seemed charged with quiet energy, as if a low-voltage current pulsed from his paws to his spine. His ears stood straight. His gaze never wavered. Elena didn't even need to speak. She felt the shift through the leash in her hand, an instinct built from years of silent trust between handler and dog. The man presented diplomatic credentials. Everything was in order. His name, according to the ID, was Charles Darrington, an officer from the Department of Defense Cooperation en route to Washington. But something was off. Elena couldn't articulate it. It was a sensation, a fraction out of place, like a puzzle piece that almost fit, but didn't. Then his eyes swept past hers, cold, blank, and she froze. Because in that glance, she remembered what Ariel had said. He never yelled. He just stared. Stared until I apologized, even when I hadn't done anything wrong. A stare that bent people without touching them. A presence that made you forget yourself, that compelled you to shrink beneath an invisible weight. Elena drew a slow breath, her eyes tracking the man as he walked through the checkpoint. Passport, diplomatic badge, carry on, everything by the book, too perfect. She unlocked her phone and pulled up a file that had been forwarded from an international agency. Damien Cross. The photo was dated 3 years ago, but the facial structure, the eyes, the walk, they all matched. It was him. And Coda had known before she did. It couldn't be. That thought flashed through Elena's mind, but her fingers were already hovering over the emergency response alert. Instinct told her that the man who had just entered the security zone wasn't just a traveler. He was a storm in disguise. And Coda, as always, had sensed it before anyone else. From the moment the sliding doors opened, the air felt heavier. Coda, who had been resting calmly beside the checkpoint desk, shot up. His ears pricked forward, his eyes locked onto a man who had just stepped into the restricted zone reserved for staff and classified passengers. Elena noticed the sudden change and turned instinctively. The man was wearing a charcoal overcoat and carrying a compact suitcase. His manner was polished, refined. He didn't attract attention, except from Coda. The Belgian Malinois didn't bark, didn't growl, but his stance was unmistakable. He was like an arrow drawn back, poised to launch. Elena approached, placing a firm hand on Coda's back. His body was taut, every muscle on alert, gaze fixed unblinking on the man. She gave no command. Her presence was enough, anchoring him while the pressure mounted silently. Her mind began matching this stranger's appearance to the details Ariel had given of Damien Cross. Under the fluorescent ceiling light, his sharp jawline, high-bridged nose, and stiff, measured gait came into focus, like someone trained in uniform. Ariel had once said, "He never looks directly at you, just observes, like everything's a target." This man wasn't looking at anyone either, but Elena saw his eyes flick toward the isolation zone, where Ariel was being held. Her heartbeat quickened. Coincidence? Or was it really him? Damien Cross, ex-military, a man of influence, and now a predator pursuing his wife and child as if they were prey. Elena moved toward the control desk, discreetly signaling for the cameras to zoom in on the man. Coda remained still, unmoving, every muscle charged. One wrong step from the stranger, and he would explode forward without hesitation. The man handed over what looked like a diplomatic passport. "Name's Daniel Crow," he said smoothly to the officer on duty. His voice was calm, his smile faint but practiced. The passport bore the seal of a small European nation, complete with diplomatic credentials. "I'm a security attaché. I've been granted clearance to provide legal counsel to a detainee." The young officer hesitated. The documents appeared legitimate. The seals looked real, but something about the moment made him glance over at Elena. "Officer Elena, there's someone requesting access to the isolation zone," he said quietly. Elena took the passport in her hand. Signature, watermark, embossing, everything checked out. Yet her gut told her the opposite. And Coda, whose instincts had saved more lives than she could count, hadn't eased. "Hold him here," she said calmly. "I need to verify this with command." The man offered a slow smile. I understand. But you do know that denying access to someone holding a diplomatic passport is a serious matter. And more serious, Elena replied, her voice steady, is allowing someone into a place where they absolutely don't belong. She turned away. And Coda, without being told, stepped forward and placed himself between the man and the corridor leading to the isolation ward. The first sound was barely audible, a low, broken growl rising from Coda's throat. Elena felt it like a shift in pressure. She knew every phase of Coda's behavior: focus, alert, evaluation, defense. But this growl wasn't trained. It came from somewhere primal. Damien Cross, still wearing that patient smile and never quite settled gaze, began walking toward the restricted doors. A young officer stepped up. "Excuse me, sir. Do you have clearance to proceed?" "Absolutely," Damien replied, producing a sleek black wallet. Inside was a diplomatic identification card embossed with the coat of arms of a small, scarcely recognized Eastern European nation. The young officer hesitated. It wasn't the first time someone with high-level clearance had passed through without full inspection. But then, Coda barked. It wasn't the growl they'd heard earlier. This was a full-throated eruption, deep, resonant, and commanding. It echoed through the corridor like a verdict, not a warning but a decision. Heads turned. A passenger nearby gasped and dropped her suitcase. The officer standing in Damien's path flinched. Elena was already moving, cutting across the hallway as her heartbeat synced with the urgency in her steps. "Stop him!" she shouted. "No one goes into the isolation zone right now!" Damien's eyebrows rose. Something flickered in his eyes. In that brief moment, Elena saw the truth. Gone was the polished diplomat, and in his place stood a man bristling with entitlement, power unaccustomed to being questioned. He wasn't used to being stopped. Coda kept barking. Again and again, a relentless rhythm that split the thick air between them, refusing to give ground. "What is this?" Damien snapped. "I hold diplomatic status. I'll report this to the embassy." Elena didn't flinch. She signaled two other officers to close in, then fixed her gaze on the passport control clerk. Her voice was even but firm. "Verify that diplomatic ID right now." The moment stretched thin, like a cord ready to snap. No one dared to move rashly. No one wanted to be the first to make the wrong call. Coda paused, just for a heartbeat, then lowered himself, muscles tensed, eyes locked onto Damien. He growled again, deeper this time, as if pointing toward something no one else could yet see. Beneath the cold fluorescence of the international terminal, a confrontation had begun. Not between guns or authority, but between reason and instinct. And this time, instinct was leading. The glass door to the isolation zone shut behind the man in the dark suit. For a moment, the atmosphere seemed to stall, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Damien Cross, if that truly was him, walked with an unnerving calm, each step measured like he was entering a summit hall, not the restricted perimeter of an international airport. Around his neck hung the diplomatic ID, slanted text, and embossed crest catching the light just so. His eyes scanned the room, not rushed, not hesitant, until they landed on Elena. She didn't need confirmation. Her instincts were louder than protocol. And when he reached the reception desk, gently placing his passport and a packet of documents onto the glass counter, the puzzle pieces began to fall into place. "My name is Daniel Cross," he said smoothly. "I've been dispatched under directive from the United States Embassy. A personal asset under my custody was misplaced on the incoming flight." His voice was refined, polished, like it had been rehearsed in mirrored rooms and press briefings. Not hurried, not nervous, just enough calculated poise to blur the lines between truth and manipulation. Elena opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the contents. Diplomatic passport, embassy authorization, even a notarized document bearing the U.S. government seal. It was all flawless, too flawless, like water that looked pure but carried a scent no one else seemed to notice. She remembered Ariel's words. He doesn't go the normal way. He always finds a way to make it all legal. And the phrase stuck with her. Personal asset. Not wife. Not child. Asset. Could you describe it more specifically? Elena asked, voice held at a neutral pitch. So we can assist with identification. He looked at her with unblinking brown eyes. A personal security device. It may have been misrouted into checked luggage. He leaned on the word device, letting it stretch with suggestion. Then he added with a faint smile, I'd be happy to assist, so long as we follow proper diplomatic channels. It was at that moment that Coda stirred. The Malinois rose, not with alarm, but with purpose. His paws moved slowly, almost ceremonially, his gaze locked on the man. No growl, no bark, just recognition. This wasn't a reaction to a suspicious object. This was something else. Recognition of a human presence, a memory in motion. Elena inhaled deeply. On paper, Damien would pass every check. But instinct, her own, and more importantly, Coda's, was telling her otherwise. Before she could act, another security officer approached, leaning in to whisper, "The handgun. We ran the serial. It matches a Beretta registered to Damien Cross." Elena's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough. Her eyes returned to Damien. She kept her composure, but the room felt narrower now, the air tighter, and then he tilted his head, as if he had expected this moment, as if he'd been waiting for it. A slow, crooked smile played on his lips, one that never reached his eyes. "Oh, so that's what this is about," Damien murmured, his tone more amusement than surprise. "I suppose you found the little gift I left for my wife." Elena clenched her fists. "You call a gun hidden beneath an infant's mattress a gift?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at her, and in that gaze was something far darker than anger. It was contempt. "You know what the problem is? Fragile women always believe that self-defense justifies turning everything into a tragedy. I only wanted back what was mine." His voice was steady, dispassionate, like he was talking about lost luggage. Yet each word tightened the air, drawing invisible threads of tension across the room. Elena could feel the shift in posture from every security officer nearby, hands hovering near radios, eyes locked, muscles coiled. "Your wife and son are not property," she said, keeping her voice level. "And that gun wasn't a tool to reclaim anything. It's evidence of violence, of threat." Damien didn't respond. He raised an eyebrow and stepped forward, just one measured step. "You have no idea what's happening above your pay grade. If I walk out of here today, you'll need more than a dog to protect the people you think you're saving." Coda growled. It wasn't just a sound. It was a reset, a rupture in the moment that yanked the room back to the present. Elena raised her hand in a clear gesture. "Hold position. No further steps." For the first time since entering, Damien halted. His eyes darkened, calculation flashing behind the facade. But the mask had cracked. Elena could see it now. This wasn't just a man with a forged identity. He wore a false face, layered, practiced, and now it was starting to fall apart. In a breath's time, she understood. If she let him move one step closer, control would shatter. "Team A and Team C, move in. Secure the target. No weapons drawn. Keep it clean," she spoke into the radio, her tone calm, almost weightless. But the units had already shifted. "Ready." Damien remained still, but his body was taut. His right arm hung at a slant, just enough for anyone trained in force to recognize the readiness for resistance. His stare wasn't passive anymore. It had become a blade, slicing across each face, each gesture. Elena moved closer, matching the force of his presence with stillness of her own. "You are breaching a Level 1 security protocol. This is a protected zone. One more step and we are authorized to act." Damien smirked. "Do you really think you can touch me without triggering an international incident?" She didn't reply, but the metallic click of safety latches disengaging behind him said more than words. Two officers appeared from either side, movements rehearsed and swift. One looped an arm around Damien's elbow, the other braced his back and wrist. He resisted, voice low and venomous. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I am the system." "That's exactly why," Elena said, stepping forward, her eyes unwavering. "We're going to check that system, layer by layer." They pinned him against the examination table. Coda moved with them, as if connected by an invisible cue, standing guard beside Elena, never breaking eye contact with Damien. A third officer scanned his body. No weapons, but there's a device embedded in his left upper arm. Looks like a chip, possibly a tracker. "Extract and seal it," Elena instructed. "All evidence will be transferred to higher security intelligence." Through clenched teeth, Damien hissed, "Everything I've done was to protect my family." Elena leaned in, her voice quiet but firm. "No family needs a gun hidden under a sleeping child." Then she stood upright. The order for handcuffs was given, and for the first time in Damien Cross's life, he was arrested. Not for treason, not for smuggling, but because the instincts of a dog had seen through him before any protocol could. He was escorted to the high-security inspection chamber. No more diplomatic credentials, no more confident smiles, just a gaze that flicked from wall to wall, desperate and searching, like a man already calculating his last possible exit. A specialist technician from Heathrow's counterintelligence unit had been summoned. With static-proof gloves, she examined every seam, every lining, every collar on the jacket Damien had carried. Each item was removed with surgical care, then scanned under UV lights and high-frequency analyzers. And slowly, what couldn't be seen by the naked eye began to emerge. "There's a GPS chip embedded in the heel of his shoe," the technician reported. "Military frequency, not consumer grade, two-way capability, capable of remote data transmission." In the inner coat pocket, a nanograde microphone, surveillance grade. Another agent stepped closer. "The watch has an encrypted communication chip, not available on the open market." Elena stood still, listening as each sentence peeled back another layer of Damien's carefully constructed identity. This man had not come to retrieve his family. He came to control them, to monitor, and if it came to it, to eliminate. "He brought an entire surveillance system with him," one technician murmured. "He's not here to find, he's here to trace." Elena gave a quiet nod and signaled for every piece of equipment to be sealed and secured. She knew this was no longer just a case of airport security. It was a warning about the shape violence can take when cloaked in legitimacy, and how only by seeing with the heart, as Coda did, could one truly detect it. When all procedures were complete and Damien Cross was finally escorted out of the isolation zone in restraints, the space left behind fell into a strange silence. It was as if something heavy had been lifted, and only now did anyone realize how long they'd been holding their breath. Coda still stood at the far end of the corridor. He hadn't moved since the moment everything began. His eyes followed Damien's exit, unblinking, unwavering, as if someone's survival was still hanging on every breath. The isolation room door creaked open. Ariel was allowed to step out. Her hands still trembled slightly, but the look in her eyes was no longer filled with despair. In her arms was the baby, sleeping soundly, lashes brushing against soft pink cheeks, unaware of how close the night had come to being something else entirely. Elena approached and gently placed a hand on Ariel's shoulder. "Are you all right?" Ariel didn't speak. She looked instead toward Coda. And then, without a single command, no gesture, no cue, Coda stepped forward. He sat slowly in front of the stroller, lowered his head. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply existed, firm, calm, immovable, as if he had always been meant to guard that exact spot. Ariel broke into tears. Not the panicked kind, but the kind of crying that's allowed when survival no longer requires silence, when fear has finally loosened its grip. Elena stepped back, leaving space for two souls who knew what it meant to live under threat, and for a third, too young to understand, but already protected by the instincts of a dog. Nearby, a young security officer whispered, "He knew," before any of us did. Elena didn't answer. She only nodded, eyes fixed on the image of Coda lying beside the baby like a barrier no force could cross. She understood then, some truths don't come in the form of evidence. Some can only be confirmed through feeling. And Coda, with one bark, with one stare, had saved that woman's life. Not once, but twice. The next morning, a pale sunlight streamed through the thick glass walls of the emergency witness housing unit at Heathrow Airport. Ariel sat on a cold metal chair, a thin coat draped over her shoulders, arms wrapped around herself like she still couldn't believe she had survived the longest night of her life. Elena stepped inside, not as an interrogator, but as someone who had seen enough to understand that some truths cannot be written into reports, but must be listened to with the heart. Ariel looked up as she entered, then slowly reached into her shirt and pulled out a thin silver necklace. The pendant was an old, weathered cross. She unclasped it, laid it gently on the table, her hand still resting on it. "This isn't just a keepsake," Ariel said. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but there was something in her eyes that had turned to steel. "It's the only thing I managed to keep when I left the house." Elena furrowed her brow, carefully lifting the pendant. She noticed a faint scratch near the edge, almost invisible, unless held directly under the light. Ariel reached for a metal pen and pressed it into the lower rim of the cross. A soft click sounded. The body of the cross opened, and inside, hidden beneath the silver shell, was a small, waterproof USB stick built to military specifications. Elena didn't speak. She simply looked at Ariel, silently asking the final question. "Everything's on this?" Ariel nodded. "I didn't know how else to prove what I've lived through. Every time I went to the police, they said there wasn't enough evidence. So I gathered it myself. Audio, hidden camera footage, photos of the bruises, everything, one by one." Elena held the USB like it contained a piece of truth no one had dared to touch. She knew that in the battle between victims and those with power, evidence wasn't just supportive. It was the only thing that could unlock justice. Ariel withdrew her hands and folded into herself again. "I almost deleted it, so many times. I thought if I kept it, I'd never be able to live like a normal person again." Elena responded gently, but with certainty. "But by keeping it, you and your son are still alive." Out in the corridor, Coda sat waiting. He didn't bark. He didn't move. But when Elena stepped out, he rose immediately, as if sensing that another truth had just been freed from the dark. Elena entered the verification room, a sealed space, windowless, lit by soft lights, with only the hum of the ventilation system and the blinking of a computer screen for company. Before her was the USB, now connected. A folder appeared on screen titled Home Truth. She opened it. Inside were 3 subfolders: video, audio, and image. Elena clicked on the video folder first. The screen flickered to life with footage from a living room. The camera angle was off-center, clearly hidden. Ariel stood trembling. Damien stepped forward, voice raised, and threw a glass against the wall. The shattering sound rang out. He grabbed her shoulders, mouth moving violently, his words lost beneath a child's crying from another room. She skipped to another file. This time it was the kitchen. Ariel held the baby in her arms. Damien stood behind her, pointing a gun, not at her, but at the fridge. Then he turned and jabbed the weapon toward Ariel. His eyes weren't furious. They were disturbingly calm. Elena closed the video files and switched to audio. The recordings were brief, but each one was a blade. "If you leave, I'll find you, even if you crawl underground. That kid doesn't need a weak mother like you." In the image folder were photos, blurred but undeniable. A black eye, bruises along her neck, scans of her shoulder, CT images of her skull with attached medical reports. One image was a sonogram. A handwritten note read, "7 weeks gestation. Patient declines to explain cause of abdominal trauma." Elena stared at the screen. Not a single file invited doubt. Not one could be easily manipulated or edited to mislead. This was truth, recorded minute by minute in the silence of survival. And Ariel had endured all of it with nothing more than a silver chain and the raw instinct to live. When Elena stepped out of the data verification room, she said nothing. In her hands was a sealed envelope containing copies of the files. She held it tightly, as if carrying something both fragile and vital. Down the corridor, Ariel sat with her back straight, eyes fixed on the frosted glass window. There were no traces of tears anymore, only the quiet stillness of someone who had learned to endure. "Elena," she said softly, "I went to the police. More than once." Elena stopped in her tracks. "And they didn't act?" Ariel let out a faint laugh, not one of joy, but the resigned sound of someone far too used to being dismissed. "They came, some even wrote reports, but then everything disappeared. One time they called me in just to tell me they couldn't find clear evidence of physical harm, that the audio recordings weren't admissible." Elena clenched her fist. "Did Damien have connections in law enforcement?" "Not just connections. He was once a strategic security advisor on a joint task force between the military and police. Some people called him a hero, others owed him favors. I couldn't get past those ties." She paused, her voice tightening. "Once they even labeled me psychologically unstable, said I was exaggerating, that I was trying to unlawfully separate a child from his father." Something caught in Elena's throat. How many times had women like Ariel been silenced? How many times had warnings gone unheard because the voices weren't powerful enough, didn't have the right background or the right gender? "They didn't see me as a mother. They saw me as a problem." Outside, Coda stood by the door, his head tilted slightly, eyes still watching the hallway. Elena glanced toward him and understood. If not for the instinct of that dog, if not for his refusal to obey routine that day, Ariel and her child might not be here to tell their story. "We're going to take this evidence forward," Elena said firmly. "This time, no one is allowed to look away." In a small office on the second floor of the Heathrow Airport security wing, Elena sat before a computer screen, the angled sunlight casting a pale streak across her tense cheek. Beside her rested the sealed envelope containing the copied evidence from the USB, a quiet reminder that truth, once uncovered, must be given a place to speak. She logged into the internal portal of the Special Investigation Division, an independent body tasked with handling misconduct within law enforcement structures. Beneath the emblem of the flag and official crest, a line appeared on the screen. You are about to submit a priority level, urgent report. Are you sure you want to proceed? Elena typed, Yes. The file, titled Case 412-A, Damian Cross, was attached in full. Officer Elena Ward's personal statement. A detailed account of the incident at the airport. All digital contents from the USB, images, videos, audio recordings, medical excerpts with injury photos, statements from direct witnesses. She added one final remark. I submit this not only to accuse a man who once hid behind national service, but to say this, listening to a victim at the right moment can save an entire family. Afterward, Elena opened the connected email portal to the International Human Rights Commission, an agency that handles violations involving citizens and law enforcement. She attached the translated documents and the full report. No personal emotions were included, only facts. When the screen confirmed, Your report has been received. We will respond within 48 hours. Elena leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. She didn't know what would happen next. But the thing that had to be done. She had done it. And this time, silence would not be allowed to look away. At the end of the hallway, Coda remained lying in place, unmoving. But Elena knew if danger rose again, he would bark, not because of a command, but because it was the right thing to do. The news broke faster than expected. Less than a week after the file was submitted, a sudden press conference was held at the Special Investigation Division, an event rare enough to signify a case of public magnitude. Elena stood in a small observation room behind a one-way mirror, hidden from the live broadcast. Outside, journalists jostled for space, camera flashes flaring without pause. At the podium, a representative from the division read aloud each line of the new indictment. Damian Cross, former strategic security officer, is now charged with the following criminal offenses: threatening acts of violence against family members, forging personal documents and falsifying diplomatic credentials, tampering with or influencing medical records related to domestic abuse, violating the rights of a child within an unsafe family environment. All charges, the speaker emphasized, are substantiated by digital evidence, visual documentation, audio recordings, and sworn witness testimonies. Elena clenched her fists when the final declaration was read. The defendant will be placed under high-risk surveillance and is barred from contacting any witnesses, family members, or individuals related to the case. Backstage, Ariel held her son tightly, her body trembling slightly with emotion. She remained unseen by the press, offered no statement, but her eyes were locked on the screen, where Damian's name now appeared beside the words, "Detained awaiting trial. High risk of retaliation." Elena moved closer and gently rested a hand on Ariel's shoulder. "It's not about winning," she said quietly. "It's that this time, no one dared to look away." Ariel glanced down at Coda, who now sat by her feet, his eyes fixed on the screen as if he understood every word. In that gaze, there was more than instinct. There was recognition. The truth, finally, had been called by its rightful name. When the conference ended, Elena and Ariel were ushered out through the back exit, shielded from the flashing lights of cameras and prying questions. The London night was damp and cold, but the sky in the north seemed softer now, like it was clearing the path for something new to begin. Their transport van stopped in front of a discreet brick building, home to the International Witness Security and Resettlement Office. Inside, Ariel and her son were formally informed. They qualified for Level 1 International Witness Protection, a rare privilege reserved for high-risk cases with global implications. Elena was the first to notice the flicker in Ariel's eyes when the words "identity change" were mentioned. In that flicker was a whole life unraveling, relief entangled with grief. "My name, It won't exist anymore? Ariel whispered. The officer nodded. You'll be issued new documentation. Your residency history will be rebuilt. All online traces will be erased or encrypted. Ariel clutched her son's hand. But will he be safe? Elijah will grow up like any other child. No one will track him. No more hidden cameras. No more fear. Ariel turned to Elena, silent for a long time. A new name. May I choose it? Elena offered a gentle smile. You're a survivor. You should have the right to name the life you fought to protect. Ariel bent down, whispered something into her son's ear, then looked up again. Adeline, she said. Adeline Shore. Elena nodded. Welcome to your second life, Adeline. Outside, Coda stood beside the escort vehicle. He tilted his head toward the breeze, sensing, as he always did, the path toward safety. And there, at the edge of the darkness just beginning to recede, 3 lives stepped into the light: a mother, a child, and a dog who had believed in what no one else dared to see. One late afternoon in May, sunlight slanted through the maple trees by the loch, casting thin golden streaks that looked as if they were breathing. A jeep came to a quiet stop on the dirt road that led to a small house, its moss-covered roof leaning gently, windows thrown open to catch the breeze. Elena stepped out first. She wasn't in uniform, just a long coat and a gray wool scarf. Coda followed, silent yet alert, his eyes sweeping the landscape in quick, practiced motions, as if old instincts were still alive beneath the calm. The house appeared behind a soft veil of mist, simple, peaceful, carrying the quiet rhythm of a place chosen for starting over. A white fence bordered the front, clusters of lavender beginning to bloom, and a wooden bench on the porch offered a quiet invitation to those who once wandered far from home. The door opened before Elena could knock. A woman stepped outside, shoulder-length hair, sun-kissed skin, and eyes that had learned how to stay bright through seasons of change. Adeline, Elena said softly, using the name newly given. Ariel, now Adeline, smiled. There were no tears, no long speeches, just a slow nod, as if to say, I'm still here, and I'm living. Elena walked up the steps. They embraced gently, like touching a memory that had never truly left. From inside the house, a child's voice rang out. Mom, who's here? A young boy came running, tousled brown hair and eyes filled with light. He stopped when he saw Coda, then burst into laughter and threw his arms around the dog's neck. Coda stood still, his eyes softening. He didn't bark, didn't move. But his tail gave a small wag, a silent greeting to the little friend who once slept in a cradle hiding more than anyone knew. And just like that, in the quiet wooden house by the water, 4 lives once driven to the edge could finally exhale in the same breath, without fear. On the soft grass, the boy laughed, chasing an orange paper airplane he had folded himself. Wind from the loch lifted it, letting it spiral, then land gently near Coda's paws. The dog tilted his head and wagged his tail, as if cheering the boy to try again. Elena sat on the porch bench, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. She watched the scene before her with a quiet gaze, rare in her long, pressured life of service. It was a moment that asked nothing of her. No alerts, no protocols, no orders to follow. Ariel, Adeline, came out of the house with a kitchen towel in hand, her hair loosely tied back. She sat beside Elena, her eyes resting on her son, who was now running in circles around the small yard lined with wildflowers. Every morning, he asks if there's enough wind for his plane to fly far, she said softly. Elena smiled. And today, is there? Adeline nodded. Today, the wind is gentle. In my heart, too. Her face no longer bore the tightness that once creased her brow. The shadows beneath her eyes had faded, replaced by color, by softness, by a smile no longer afraid. Slowly, she had learned to live without always looking behind her. The boy shouted, "Mom, I won!" Then sprinted toward them, diving into Adeline's arms, his hands wrapped around her neck with pride. Coda padded over, lying beside them, his head resting on the boy's leg like he had always belonged there. And in that moment, in the stillness of a windless evening, was the simplest, most profound image of what had been claimed: peace. Elena and Adeline sat together beneath the porch roof, their tea still sending up faint threads of steam. In front of them, sunlight poured through the leaves, scattering gentle patterns onto the wooden table. No words passed between them for a while. It was as if both minds were walking back through their own pasts, quietly, step by step. It was Ariel who finally broke the silence, her voice no longer trembling, yet still holding the soft edge of an unhealed memory. "I used to think I wouldn't survive that night," she said. Elena didn't speak. She simply looked at her. "When he pressed the gun to my head, I didn't think of myself. I thought of Elijah's face if he woke up and didn't see his mother again." Ariel exhaled. "I don't even remember how I escaped, just the sound of the wind, and my heartbeat, like instinct." Elena gently placed her hand over Ariel's. "And you followed it. That's why you're still here." They both turned their eyes to the yard, where the boy was still flipping over fallen leaves, searching for insects. Every movement of the child was a living proof that the story had not ended in darkness. "And you?" Ariel asked. "Did you ever think you were wrong, for trusting a bark no one could explain?" Elena smiled. "I was trained to trust the process, but that day, Coda taught me to believe in something else, to trust a silence that was trying to speak." A light breeze swept through, carrying the rustling of the trees and the scent of damp earth, the smell of something being reborn. And in that moment, both women, once victim and protector, now survivor and witness, nodded together, not to close a chapter, but to affirm that they had made it through, with courage, with trust. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the light turned pale gold, casting a gentle honeyed hue over the landscape. The boy sat cross-legged on the grass, arranging pebbles in neat lines. Coda lay close beside him, his body stretched out, head resting on his front paws, ears softly alert. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't moving either. His eyes tracked each step, each laugh, each flutter of leaves near the child, like a living camera. But not cold, not mechanical, watching with something deeper than duty. Ariel, now Adeline, watched quietly from a distance. She didn't call her son in, even as the air turned cooler with the early touch of evening. She seemed to understand that some moments were meant to be left untouched, just as Coda had left many things unspoken, yet never unattended. Elena walked over and sat beside the dog. Her hand rested lightly on Coda's strong back. "You still remember how to stand guard without being told, don't you?" Coda didn't answer, of course, but in his eyes was something Elena had seen before, a complete trust, not in the mission, in the people. The boy leaned against Coda without even thinking, his small head resting naturally along the dog's side, and Coda never looked away from the horizon, where there was no threat, only stillness. But to Coda, it was still a place worth watching. That was how he stood guard, not with teeth, not with bark, but with presence, quiet, steady, like a reflex that would never leave. Evening settled gently over the lake as the boy drifted into sleep and the house filled with a soft amber glow. Adeline, poured more tea into Elena's cup, and sat across from her. There were no more eyes looking away, no trace of fear. Only the quiet steadiness of someone who had walked through the dark and come out on the other side. "You know," Ariel began, her voice calm now, "since moving here, I joined a small group, women who've survived abuse. There's a program called Adopt a Dog, meant to help them rediscover what safety feels like." Elena lifted her head slightly, listening closely. "It's simple," Ariel continued. "Each woman adopts a dog that's been abandoned, just like them. But it's not only about taking care of the dog, it's about bonding, learning to care again, and most of all, feeling protected." Her voice wasn't emotional, but rather thoughtful, like someone quietly recounting her own journey through the reflections of others. "At first, I just went to observe," Ariel gave a small smile. "But then I watched this one woman reach out and gently touch the back of a little dog that had been shaking in the corner. She said, 'I think it understands me, because it doesn't know what it means to be loved either.'" Elena said nothing. She didn't need to. We don't talk much about the past. But in the eyes of those dogs, and in the way those women begin to change, I saw something. Sometimes the fastest way to heal a soul is to let it help heal another. A soft breeze passed by, carrying with it the distant rhythm of waves meeting the shore. Elena nodded. Inside her something stirred, like Coda's first bark, a sound that needed no translation. Elena leaned back, letting the cool of night brush the edge of her neck. She smiled, a quiet contemplation in her eyes. "Your story reminded me of someone named Reuben. He lives in South London," she said, her voice almost a whisper beneath the crackle of the fire outside. "He used to be a firefighter. After a blaze where he couldn't save a family, Reuben pulled away from everything, his job, his friends, the world, until he met a dog named Max. Max had been left behind in another fire, terrified, refusing to step into darkness, and slowly, their broken pieces found each other." Ariel listened without interrupting. Elena continued. "I saw them in the park once. He was sitting there reading, Max resting by his side. I asked him, 'What did you do to make Max trust again?' And Reuben said, 'I didn't do anything, I just stayed.'" Elena looked toward the window, where Coda lay near the boy. "I think dogs don't change us with some grand gesture. They change us by simply being there, at the right time, in the right place, in exactly the way we need." Ariel nodded. "Like Coda did for me." Elena smiled gently. "And for me too. Coda redefined what trust means to me. It's not something you prove. It's something you choose." Silence wrapped around them like a heavy blanket, not weighty, but warm. Two women, once strangers, now held together not just by their shared hardships, but by the quiet strength of a creature who couldn't speak, yet taught them how to listen. A peaceful pause followed Elena's story. In that moment, only Coda's steady breathing and the soft glow of lamplight filtering through the window remained. Ariel stood and walked to the glass. She looked out to where Coda still lay beside the porch, his head slightly tilted toward the door, eyes not quite closed. "Elena," she said quietly, "have you ever thought, maybe Coda didn't come to save anyone?" Elena stepped beside her. "What do you mean?" "Maybe," Ariel whispered. "He came to remind us that there's a world inside ourselves that needs saving too, one we often forget." Their eyes met. There was nothing more to say. Coda, with his alert ears and quiet posture, was more than a loyal companion, more than a hero in the shadows of an airport. He had become a symbol of something greater, presence without words, trust without demands, and a bond that reached beyond the scars no one else could see. Elena remembered every bark, every moment Coda had stood between danger and safety, not because he was told to, but because he felt it. And now, in the stillness of this small lakeside home, she understood what Coda had truly given them. It wasn't just safety. It was a door back to something they thought they had lost: trust, connection, and the quiet miracle of a heart still willing to believe in the world. On the way back to London, Elena pulled over on the shoulder of a quiet hillside road where wild grass swayed and the faint outline of a Scottish lake shimmered far behind her. The early morning wind rustled through the low trees, stirring the leaves with the sound of a whispered conversation. Coda lay in the back seat, eyes half closed, but his ears still flicked in response to the subtle shifts of the world around him. Elena leaned her elbows on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on that distant glint of water. In the silence, her mind gently rewound through everything that had brought her here. The moment Coda barked for the first time, cutting through the rigid protocol she had once believed was untouchable. The tension in Ariel Song's eyes amidst a sea of strangers. The stroller and the silent gun hidden beneath a layer of soft cotton. If that day she had dismissed the bark as a mistake, if she had looked only at the checklist, at the files, at the cold and tidy standards, Ariel might have been arrested for terrorism. The child might have been taken from his mother. And Damien, the man who hid behind charm and impeccable credentials, might have continued unchallenged. Elena took a deep breath. "If it weren't for Coda," she whispered, "I would never have seen what eyes can't see." The heart, something she had learned to set aside through years in the security field, had been brought back to her, not through logic, but through presence. Through a dog who never needed to speak to be understood. She turned to look at him. Coda still lay quietly in the back seat. He needed no command, no call. He was simply there, as he had always been. Elena started the engine, then stopped it again. In her chest, a question stirred gently. All those years working in security, how many times had she believed that a disobedient dog meant failure? But Coda had shattered that belief. And perhaps that very defiance had been the right thing all along. No one had ordered Coda to leap toward the stroller. No alarm had triggered his bark. No warning light, no audio cue, no measurable signal had confirmed the threat. There was only instinct. Something in the air, in the rhythm of breath, in a flicker of the eye, in the tremble of a woman's hand. Something only Coda had felt. He had trusted the one thing every training manual tries to tame: intuition. Elena glanced into the rearview mirror. Coda still lay there. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't nuzzle her shoulder like a dog waiting for praise. He was still, as if nothing had been broken at all. And in that stillness, Elena heard what felt like a declaration. A dog does not need a command to know how to protect. A dog does not need to follow the rules to be a hero. Because real loyalty isn't always about obedience. Sometimes it is the courage to do differently, to do what is right. And there, in that moment before the morning fully broke, Elena believed with certainty it was instinct, that quiet defiance, that had saved a family. The first light of day slowly unfurled across the still surface of the lake, tinting the water gold and painting soft lines across the faces of those who remained. A small boy sat on the wooden porch, his tiny hand gently stroking Coda's back. With every touch, Coda closed his eyes and tilted his head ever so slightly, as if embracing the entire world through that one gesture. Behind them, Ariel sat quietly on the steps. Her dark hair fell softly over her shoulders, and her gaze followed the two figures before her with a tenderness that said this quiet moment was something she had once only dreamed of, but never truly believed would come. She didn't speak. She simply smiled. Not a forced or polite smile, but one that flowed effortlessly from the kind of peace it takes years to reclaim. Elena stood at the edge of the yard, hands tucked into her coat pockets, eyes drawn toward the lake. There was nothing left to say. The journey was over. Every question had found its answer. Every wound had begun to heal. And only one truth remained, the one that had always been there, though it took a long road to finally see it. That sometimes, to save someone, you don't have to make noise. You just have to stay still, stay present, and stay when it matters most. Coda lifted his head, eyes catching the new light dancing on the water's edge. He didn't bark. He didn't move. But that presence, that quiet, unwavering presence, was the most beautiful sound of a morning where life was beginning again. Coda was not a perfect dog. He didn't always follow commands. He didn't always move according to protocol, and that was exactly why he mattered. Because in a world where everything can be trained, conditioned, or automated, loyalty and instinct remain the rarest things that cannot be replicated. The story of Ariel, the little boy, and Coda wasn't just about an incident at an airport. It was a reminder of the unseen bonds between people and dogs, where a single glance can become a lifeline, where a dog, even one trained to obey, might still choose to act from love and instinct. German Shepherds, Malinois, or any other breed. They weren't born to be tools. They were born to love, to protect, and sometimes to guide us, right at the moment we're about to fall. So love them, cherish them, honor them, as they have loved us, unconditionally, without demand. Sometimes with nothing more than a single bark at just the right time.